Hi, I'm Danielle, Brathwaite, Shirley. I am an artist and archivist, and mainly what I do is I archive Black trans experience through interactive artworks, animations, and autonomous archives, which essentially are archives that take in your identity or the identity of the player and decide what to show them depending on the choices they make and the person that they are. I've kind of chosen the format of gaming or interactive work or work that requires input for it to begin and end. Because I see the potential in it as something to really get the visitor to see themselves within the work rather than have the work do the actual legwork for them. Saying work too many times. But essentially, I'm very tired of people being passive when it comes to art and seeing it and kind of consuming it in their own way and then nodding to themselves, saying, well done, giving themselves a pat on the back and then leaving. And instead, the practice that I really want to engage in is having the audience have to participate within the topics that I'm interested in order for them to see anything, in order for the work to even begin. They have to place themselves at a disadvantage often to gain a place within the work and a understanding of what they are seeing. So hi, this is my desktop. I don't know if this is interesting, but the way I kind of like to work is a bit like having a messy desk, is that I have a lot of files that mean nothing, essentially. There's just a lot of them, but that I can look at, and so I can pull from them at any moment. So I don't really sort things into particular folders, and nothing from one project just stays in that project. Usually there's a big bleed over. And so the ways that works for me is having large just folders or just my entire computer and everything in one place rather than it being sorted. So I'm going to show you something I'm working on right now, which is an interactive tapestry. This is made in Up BGE, which is a game engine no one uses and is a little bit useless. But it's great for prototyping, and I really love it for that. And it's inspired by a Game & Watch game, but everything you see as this kind of colorful background is actually a tapestry that we've actually made. It's about 3 meters by 2 meters high, and the idea is that we'll project these images onto the tapestry, and then you'll be able to play the tapestry with the dance mat. Down here is the code. So I've written all the code for this, but you didn't have to write a single line. It's called node-based, and it's all done by these sensors over here. So, for example, if I press the right arrow, these things will light up, et cetera, et cetera. It's all very basic coding, but at the same time, it doesn't look too basic because I've been working on it for about a couple of months. Basically, I was looking at a lot of archives and older archives. So in terms of older archives, I mean, before we really started archiving things in like libraries, big depositories of information, there were things like maps in rugs and pots and different kind of ways of recording like land or history. And I was interested in trying to make one for Black transness, but also the idea of where that thought first arrived and first came from. And so this tapestry is thought of about when the first Black trans thought or the first thought of transitioning came out of someone's body and other people saw it. Kind of was inspired by these old etchings in walls and these old kind of ways of telling history through an actual physical piece. But at the same time, I was really intrigued when I went to this computer spiel museum. I was looking at the Game & Watches, and I used to play a lot of them when I was younger, but I was really intrigued on how they were designed and made. And for me, it's such a simple thing, but it hadn't really been explored in this idea of playing a physical piece of artwork. And that's something I really wanted to try and put together, this kind of idea of history, and at the same time having this tapestry that's large, physically made, but it's at the same time can be played similar to a Game & Watch. It's really beautiful, actually. I don't usually say that. I usually hate everything I make, but I really like it. So we're opening Unity. Of course, Unity is trying to get us to install a new version, which we definitely do not want. Okay, so this is my project for Arbeit. So this is a scene as part of this game that I'm making. So this is like kind of behind the scenes shot as it plays. Movements were actually motion captured by me using this program called Deep Motion. And so this game essentially is a gun game similar to House of the Dead. And so what we've done is we've printed the 3D gun. It will be set up with a Wii remote so you can shoot at the screen. And as you go through it, you will be able to see different levels, shoot different things. And if we click here, it will start. And so as you can see, this is the aiming reticle, and it says don't shoot, so we won't shoot. And it kind of talks to you and insults you. And the premise was I really love these gun games. I really have a big draw towards these old retro shoot 'em up games where you'd go in an arcade and actually have a physical gun. But I wanted to make one which wasn't violent, which seems so counterintuitive and almost impossible. And I said I wanted to make a gun game based on Black trans people where you can't shoot any Black trans people. And when getting through the level requires you to use the gun, but at the same time, it also insults you for wanting to use the gun. And so you're stuck in this dichotomy of knowing that you have to get the good ending and to protect people, you have to use the gun to shoot people, but you don't know who to shoot, you don't know when to shoot, you don't know where to shoot. And then so the whole time you're very nervous about when to pull this trigger. And so the first thing the game does as you start it, it says why are you excited to pick up this gun? How dare you think that you're going to pick up this gun and enjoy yourself? It's not going to be an enjoyable game for you. So essentially, it's a very slow gun game where a successful run would be if you shot 5-6 times, and the rest of the time you sweated. Something that I love recently, doing a lot of kind of arcade exploring. That sounds like an actual task, but it's not. It's just going to an arcade and having fun. Is that you can really host the setting. And the important thing about that is when you put a game online, people can play it from any which way they want to play it, and you can't really determine what they do or make them feel not judged, but seen as they play and as they make decisions. And something about placing it in the gallery means that everyone observes you make a choice. And so you feel that the pressure from those eyes, which is a big theme in my work, really, from it being in a public place, and from you having to enter a space that may or may not be made for you. And it's usually clear who the space is made for. And that's something that when you do it online, you can't really control that because the environment is someone's home or their garden or wherever they are. But when you design and build your own room, you get to control all facets of the experience. Meaning the controller is unique. And so they have to think about things while they hold the controller. For example, this one will be a pink gun, which is really flimsy and doesn't feel strong at all. It doesn't feel like you'll be able to do anything. And the whole point is to not make you feel strong and to make you feel extremely weak. And if we put this online, we wouldn't be able to have the same kind of effect as that. As well as when we put this in the gallery, it'll be live streamed 24 hours a day. So people will observe you and judge you playing the game. These are kind of the things I love to look at all the time. So this is an FMV game, probably from before Christ was born. No, obviously it's probably 1990s. And I love these kind of terrible aesthetics. I love these games which try to push the boundary into cinematics before that was possible. And so this is all pre-rendered, probably running on a PC called Cyber War. It's awful. That you can't tell when the gameplay starts and gameplay ends, but you also don't know if you would want to play each of the segments. But things like this are really inspiring to me in terms of aesthetics, and in terms of what you can achieve with very little. Yeah, there's just something about this idea of, how do I call it, low quality graphics conveying a larger message. So a game that does it really well is this one is so good, is D. And then I'll show you King's Quest after this. So is D. So this is another pre-rendered game which ran on the PS1. And essentially the PS1 couldn't do graphics like this. So what they had to do was, essentially this is a very big video file split up into PNG images. And then when you press forward, they progress through the PNG images, or they play a sequence of them. And having the workarounds of that in order to get good graphics on a system that's essentially bad at doing 3D is something that I'm extremely invested in. I love these techniques of trying to achieve something which is almost unachievable in the system. Essentially, in my games, I'm trying to lull you into a very particular mindset of what you think to expect to see, so that it looks like I'm pushing the boundaries of graphics within my own parameters that I'm setting. So I'm setting myself as a PlayStation 1 and then trying to push beyond that. The thing I love about this game is that it was doing something it really couldn't do. It really couldn't do. But because of that, and because of the limitations of the PS1, the mood is extremely uncomfortable. It's very creepy. The way that the polygons on the characters work doesn't really make much sense. And it's, you can tell it's trying to push something out, that this looks like a scorpion, but does it really look like a scorpion? The texture in it looks like a complete mess. The rendering distance isn't very far at all, but that means it feels quite scary when you play it, and it feels quite claustrophobic. And that's something I'm really interested in is actually getting that vibe right, rather than actually having a graphic that looks exactly like me. It's about using as little polygons as possible to archive or achieve the vibe I want. And so sometimes this vibe is like a story I want to tell. So it might be that like, I got my hormones today. I did a whole thing on getting hormones. And so I'm like, what is the vibe to get hormones? How little polygons can I use to capture this idea of the first time you take a hormone pill, or the first time you see a trans person, or the first time you're misgendered, or something like that. The first kind of game that my dad bought for me, which I was not allowed to play because my mum saw it, was Blade. On the PS1. And I think I'd seen bits of the film. I wasn't old enough to see the film, but I might have seen it anyway. And to see Wesley Snipes as Blade in a 3D environment made no sense to me. I didn't understand how they got a real person into a 3D environment. And I thought there had to be some kind of like body transfusion. Like, so essentially I thought Wesley Snipes had to step inside a machine, and the machine would like scan Wesley Snipes from head to toe and somehow transfer a bit of Wesley Snipes into the game, and then we'd have the ability to play as Wesley Snipes. Obviously, that's not the case, but that's how my kid brain worked at the time. And so because I went to that length of imagination, these games became like really crucial to me, because I thought that they held bits of humans. And it's similar with movies. I thought when people died in movies, shows how young I was, I thought they actually died. So if someone played a character that got shot and they died, I thought, wow, the actor actually died. Well, what a rough role, which is ridiculous. But it meant that the media at this time, and the media in these games, really stuck with me, because I thought this actually affected the real world. For a long time, I was into PS1, so I was trying to replicate PS1 graphics. And now I'm into PS2, so I'm trying to replicate PS2 graphics. And I often look at game engines, as like ways of archiving and ways of storing particular data that have been underutilized because they're only been made to do entertainment. And so this is why I look so fondly on engines, because I think there's a lot more engines can do than they are currently being used for. So when I was first kind of, I guess, transitioning, whatever, I played this game called Dragon's Dogma. And I didn't understand any words for trans. I didn't understand what trans meant. It didn't really mean anything to me. But I knew I wanted to look a certain way. And so in this game, Dragon's Dogma, I let you create a character, and had a very fleshed out character creator. And so what I did was that I made one character of me and one character that I wanted to look like. And I played as the one I wanted to look like, and the one of me tagged along behind me, kind of chased up with. And so from that moment on, I kind of started using the games that I would play as a little diary, until I got my hands on Blender, when actually it was actually a program called PhotoAnim first, because I didn't know how to use Blender. It's an old software, rubbish old software made by one developer. Let's use this. So you take a picture. So here's a picture. So you draw around it. I'm going to do this really rough, because obviously this is not like going to become anything. And then it gives you this shape, and then you go to animation, initialize, 3D front derivative mesh, and then it makes it 3D. So that's all it really does. But this is my first introduction into 3D design. And I kind of used it as a diary to archive like things around me and things that I liked. But when I got Blender, and instead of rendering like, oh, I want it to look like my high school, I want it to look like me, I would just use it as a diary. So whatever happened, I would say, right, I need to put this down, and whatever comes out, that will represent it. Until I essentially had this huge world that I had made from these days and days and days and days of rendering and drawing and all this stuff. That was the time I realized that 3D could do a lot. Yeah, it was like a really interesting moment, me seeing it. It does work. It does. I can actually put my feelings into this. That's what I made. blacktransarchive.com, if it loads up, yes. And so this was the first game I made with a group of, and I say 15, it's 10 to 15, I can't remember now, but Black trans people. And so the whole aim was to create an archive that was made by us, written by us, and that recorded our experiences in the ways that we would do it, not the way that someone looking outside in would do it. And that process was extremely difficult. I didn't really know how to archive individuals, but that was the whole point, is about finding a new format that this might work and developing it into something that we also wanted to watch. So I was trying to fulfill this idea that there's no Black trans game developers, there's no Black trans cartoons, there's no Black trans archives. Let's do it all at once. Characters designed by everyone, landscapes based on actual stories that they told. The story is based on things that they actually wanted in real life within a fantasy setting of this Black trans world that doesn't exist. This is where this idea of the game element just blew up, because initially I didn't know what to do, but I wanted it to be accessible to everyone. And the questions that arose when we started making it were, if it's accessible to everyone, how do we make sure it continues to center certain people? And that's when kind of these choices exploded, because it became about the person playing, and that person had to perform their own identity to experience this game rather than us having to perform anything. And so I would say this is the genesis of where my practice actually started, in terms of actually knowing what I wanted to do, knowing the aesthetic and how it could work in terms of archiving and recording experiences. A lot of galleries, one of the main things they use now is game engines. A lot of people are using Unity and Unreal to build those boring, swooping world things that used to just be pre-rendered. Now they use game engines to do that. And I think there is an opening eye to it, kind of like a one eye like this. But some games are being some games that I'm making are oh, this is art, but at the same time, they're this is an art experience rather than a video game. So they have to make a delineation between the two. I don't know if it's placing one above the other. I don't really understand. Usually the conversation I have is, I've made this game. Someone says to me, I don't like games. I say, I've made art. And they say, oh, you've made interactive art. That's so interesting. And I'm looking at them you're an idiot. What's wrong with you? But I think there's a similar thing that happens when someone says, I don't like painting. And I'm you don't like painting. What does that mean? Do you not like people that paint? Every painting is rubbish to you? I don't understand that either. But obviously painting has this long drawn history of someone looking at it and going, this is worth $50,000. And games don't have that. Games have, this is worth 60 quid. And if it's worth any more, how dare it be worth any more? And so I think even the game industry has to depreciate the value of what they're selling. It's a weird thing. It's a really weird thing. I have a lot of friends of mine that tell me video games are not art. And I'm what do you think I'm doing? What do you think I do? And yeah, and there's a lot of people that I know that make games that are this is not art, this is a video game. So I don't know why it's so combative. I don't know why people are so closed off either side, because it's just a means of communicating something. It's a technique. I say it often, I see the internet and game mechanics as the same as I see paint. It's a medium to use, and how you use it determines on what you're seeing and the how good the work is. When we get to a point where a web address can be seen as a piece of art, then I'm happy, because that's what I love. I love curating, painting the viewer experience. For me, I paint the viewer experience. I paint how the viewer interacts with the world. That's the way I'm generating work. It's not just the experiences that you see or the things that you're seeing. It's how I'm making you move and feel during and after it. And that's when the art comes from, at least for me. I have this idea of not recreating trauma within work. It's not the moment of trauma that's interesting to me. It's how people deal with it, how the world is built around it, how try not to build a world or something around it. And it's the first game that I've made or seen, not to blow my own horn or anything, but that is about anti-violence, and has a gun in it, and is about not using the gun, and is about not causing pain to anyone else, but having to use this thing as a means to protect someone. And if you can protect someone with a gun, that's the realm that this game is going into, is that it's trying to say the things that we find fun within games, the things that we all know, if you shoot a gun in a game, because there's been so much development in making that feel good and right, what does it mean to have development that makes shooting gun feel wrong? So I think it will be a really interesting kind of experience for the viewer to be placed in a situation that they don't want to be in. And it's going to be very uncomfortable, but also fun, but not fun. And it's one of those ones, I describe it a bit more like a roller coaster. And it's actually set up a bit like a theme park, but it will be, everything is on the viewer. This time, every single thing is on that viewer, and it's really going at them. And they're performing. It's their performance. It's their time to shine and not shine. It's probably the most controversial thing I've made, but that's why I'm super excited to see how people will respond to it. And it could go completely wrong, and that's what I love. It's a big risk.